awkward unless we make it awkward.
Sorry about the long title, y'all. It's kind of a reference to another long title. And you guys are going to have to put up with me being a little quiet today. But hello, all. I'm Dylan. And today I'm going to be sharing a behind-the-scenes look at the research I've been doing this year for DCRIT. Like several of my classmates today, I didn't arrive at my thesis topic in a straight line. I knew that I wanted to write about art or performance, and I knew that I also wanted to do archival research. But I toyed with a number of different ideas on how to package that research. During the first semester, I thought I was working toward a project discussing the design of political street action in conjunction with certain performance art events that involve audience participation. I was reading a lot of psychology studies about solidarity and ritual and was fascinated by the idea that there is some formal element of rhythm or sound that encourages group cohesion in churches, on the dance floor, and in the street. But to be honest, it's pretty well-trod territory, and quite frankly, I'm not an anthropologist. So I decided to take a step back and change the direction from which I was examining the problem. Rather than exploring the mechanisms of group cohesion, I decided to focus on the unique shape of communication within the protest or performance, specifically focusing on ACT UP and figures like artist, writer, and activist David Wojnarowicz, who helped plan and inspire the design of grassroots-level protest, political events that continue to resonate decades later. Central to my thesis is the premise that political protest doesn't exist in a vacuum. Those organizing political street action came to the same conclusion as performers long ago. The viewer is part of the action. In our contemporary world, political protests are indelibly connected with the news camera. And the more I read about ACT UP, the more I realized that those involved were hyper-aware of this fact. A number of those involved were, after all, artists and performers. By looking at unpublished journals, sorry, we're having a little bit of a video problem here. By looking at unpublished journals, personal correspondence, FBI files, and other archival materials, I was able to open a window into the lives of those involved. One of the things I found over and over again in my research was evidence of just how media savvy and aware these people were. In this photo of a page from a journal of the leader of ACT UP's de facto PR firm, Avram Finkelstein, you can see notes taken during a meeting about what would become the iconic silence equals death image. There's even a message to research the direction of the triangle, a clear sign that they were consciously making use of symbols that would arrive before the audience's eyes, preloaded with connotations. My emphasis on the media-ready performance of protest does not in any way diminish the sacrifice and bravery of those who are willing to put their bodies on the line and risk arrest and police violence. But it is significant that even when calling to, for example, seize control of the FDA, ACT UP's street actions, like all effective minority protest movements, were primarily designed as information warfare. In a series of letters exchanged with an imprisoned Marxist, David Wojnarowicz discusses how he believes in the power of violent revolution, but chooses instead to use his skills and energy to wage war on the discursive plane. As he writes, "What stops me short on certain levels is that the balance of power in this society rests in the hands of those who control information so effectively." The more research I did, the more I realized that this wasn't just a story about ACT UP, or even about how David Wojnarowicz and other creatives inspired the actions in question, though that was part of it. Even more, this was a story about media and imagery in the contemporary world. Both media created by the activists and artists involved in ACT UP street actions, and the media created by those who documented and responded to it. I keep hearing that we live in a post-truth world, and I know I'm not the only one that's heard that. 35 years ago, when Baudrillard, patron saint of the postmodern age, claimed that rather than a war, the bombers flying over the Gulf were part of a media event, he was met with a kind of chilly reception. But it seems that today, a large percentage of our contemporaries regularly claim that not only is everything a media event, but that the same media has no necessary connection to reality. This semester, as I was surveying some, but certainly not all, of the most popular thinkers on representation and being visible in public, I was struck by something that Judith Butler said in Notes Toward a Performative Theory of Assembly. The specific thesis of this book is that acting in concert can be an embodied form of calling into question the inchoate and powerful dimensions of reigning notions of the political. After all, there is an indexical force of the body that arrives with other bodies in a zone visible to media coverage. Butler's book includes an extensive section wherein they redefine and discuss what they mean by the performative, an idea that has been taken in many directions. But what I'm taking away for this discussion is this. Protest is effective as a performance to the effect that those present are the embodied evidence of their own precarity. This question of the relative power of documentation, whether of protesters in the street or as an action in and of itself, was something that I would come back to over and over again as I was doing my research. As I was reading through Wojnarowicz's journals, I noted that his mentor and former partner, photographer Peter Hujar, was a prominent presence, maybe even especially after Hujar's death in 1988. It was in 1988 that Wojnarowicz first went to an ACT UP meeting, and it was also in 1988 that he tested for HIV. It was also in that same year, in the moments following Hujar's death, that he took a set of photos. In sharp black and white close-up, we see Hujar's body lying on the hospital bed, emaciated, feet poking out below a blanket. The photograph is the ultimate indexical, undeniable evidence, in this case, of the AIDS pandemic. And yet, today, in a world replete with AI, the photograph is deniable. Bodies in the street aren't, or at least not in the same way. Putting aside the question of false flags and paid actors, the street action is, as Butler argues, real evidence of people's lives. When I started this project, I was particularly interested in the relationship between artists and the design of political protest. One event I did a fair amount of research on was the 1992 Ashes Action, when ACT UP activists brought cremated remains of their loved ones to the gates of the White House. I was familiar with and had read Wojnarowicz Close to the Knives, where he famously wrote, "I imagine what it would be like if each time a lover, friend, or stranger died of this disease, their friends, lovers, or neighbors would take the dead body and drive with it in a car 100 miles an hour to Washington, D.C., and blast through the gates of the White House and come to a screeching halt before the entrance and dump their lifeless form on the steps." But I wondered if his words inspired the action, or if this was a general idea that was floating around at the time. So, in my research, I'd already noticed that Wojnarowicz used his journals to do everything from record dreams to plan art projects. So I sifted through journals and letters and found that this was in fact an idea that he had written in various forms repeatedly, starting as early as a 1988 journal entry. That same year, he also wrote it on a jacket and wore it publicly to a protest where he was photographed. I also found a letter dated to 1991 that pointed me to the fact, confirmed by his foundation, that Wojnarowicz did a public reading from Close to the Knives at an ACT UP benefit the year before the ACT UP members brought the cremated remains of their loved ones at the White House gates. Ultimately, one can't say unequivocally, this caused this, when we're talking about creative inspiration, but one can draw a clear through line between Wojnarowicz's words and the political funeral at the White House that would take place the year of his death, making it a prime example of the way in which creative practice and political action were intertwined for ACT UP. And in a way, it's an example of something even more central to my analysis. Bringing the cremated remains of the bodies into the public square is the ultimate example of what Butler meant by the indexical force of the body. It's undeniable proof, undivorced from its origin. I think both artists and activists can learn a lot from the design of that particular event, because ultimately that's the goal of both performance and action, right? To hold up an image to the public in order to convince others of a shared sense of reality. The danger that images become divorced and disconnected from their origins is, of course, a real risk both for protest and political art. Museums like the Guggenheim, for example, that take money from a variety of people today house art that was originally intended as a political statement. Indeed, institutionalization of political art is something that also came up in my research, though I only touched on it briefly in my paper, and not at all thus far in this presentation. To give you a little background info, in 1989, the NEA funded and then pulled funding from a show that would have a catalog essay written by David Wojnarowicz. The American Family Association, a conservative think tank, decided that the show was prime culture wars bait and published a pamphlet skewering Wojnarowicz's work as pornography. He countered by suing them for copyright infringement and won. At the center of the argument was how the AFA had pulled small sections of his work out of context, as in the top corner of the image on the left. But I think the question of political art being pulled out of context has become even muddier today. The question of images divorced from their origins is an interesting question and ripe for research, given recent ideological attacks on public funding for the arts. But for now, I'm just going to leave you with my present work and a quotation from Wojnarowicz's journals that I found in the archives, and I think speaks to the power of embodiment and being present. Art, whether intentional or not, is made up of gestures that are coded with politics. History is always preserved by and for a certain class structure. History is a mythology that assists certain elements of society in continuing life as they want it or want to believe it. So I reinvent history or mythology using symbols that aren't traditionally used.
Yes.
What did we do to you? Your voice.
I know.
Your voice was perfect.